Hello there, I am Michele Bullock, licensed massage therapist in Washington State, and I bring you massage and bodywork licensing exam resources. Here on YouTube, I have tons of videos, and on my website, I have courses, I have downloads, some are free, some are paid. So in this webinar, I'm going to be talking about tissues of the body, what you need to know regarding how the cells come together and form tissue. The last video I did was about cells, so we're just going step by step. And so I'm going to be talking about the tissues of the body on a cellular level and why that's important. We're going to be talking about epithelial, muscle, nervous, and connective tissues. And at the very end, we're going to be doing some MBLEx-style questions based on the information that is in this webinar. So there's a lot to understanding the tissues of the body and how they work together, but all we need to know is what we need to know in order to pass the massage and bodywork licensing exam. So I got the information from the Applied Anatomy and Physiology textbook that a lot of massage schools use, and so I just go over that. And so it's a great supplement also for if you are currently taking anatomy and physiology to watch through this, and so you know exactly what you need to know and you're not tripping on all the other stuff. Now, I'm going to be talking more about all of these tissues when I go through the systems for anatomy and physiology. So I'm going to be talking about, for epithelial, I'm going to be talking about the integumentary system. For muscle tissue, I'm going to be talking about the skeletal muscular system. Same thing for connective tissue. So I'm going to be talking more in depth about all of those tissues, and then for nervous tissue, I'm also going to be talking about that when I talk about the nervous system. But this is just a quick overview of how the tissues work on a cellular level. Okay, so we're just building up, and then when we come back to the systems, it will be bringing that information back in. Okay, so make sure and stick around to the end so that you can go through those MBLEx-style questions so you know what to expect on the exam when it comes to this kind of information. So I will see you in the slideshow. Make sure and download the PDF of the slideshow so that you can follow along, and then also you'll have that information available to you without having to get into the course later on in order to get that information. So there will be a download link in the description right now for the slideshow for this particular video, and then in the future it will be a link that goes to the course so that you can get it that way. So I'm going to go ahead and get started, and I will see you in the slideshow, and you won't see me anymore. Goodbye. Okay, here we are talking about tissues on the cellular level. We're going to be talking more deeply about each type of tissue when we go to each body system. But for right now, we're just going to be talking about the cellular composition of tissue in all these different categories. So why is this important? The study of cellular structure and function naturally leads into the study of tissue, because when similar cells work together, they form specialized tissue types that perform the body's essential functions, linking microscopic cell processes to the larger systems that keep the body alive and balanced. And this is important for massage therapists to know because it will help them to understand how different kinds of tissue responds to touch, pressure, and healing. And it will help you as a massage therapist or body worker to be able to apply techniques safely and effectively to support that tissue's repair and to adapt treatments based on a client's unique physiological needs. So what we're going to be going over in this educational clip is we're going to go over the 4 different tissue types. We have epithelial tissue, which is the skin and other coverings. We have muscle tissue, which is specialized for contraction and movement. We have nervous system tissue, which is for communication, and we have connective tissue, which is everything else. It supports, protects, and binds all the other tissues and structures. Okay, so first thing we're going to talk about is the first one on the list, epithelial tissue. It is in the skin, it's in the cavity linings. Remember, we were talking about body cavities, and it covers organs. It lines, covers, protects, and secretes. and it has no vasculation, avascular. So it's organized into layer arrangements and different shapes of cells. So let's see, a simple layer arrangement is just one layer. Okay, they can't just say single layer. They call it a simple layer arrangement. Stratified layer arrangement is referring to multiple layers. And then pseudo-stratified arrangement means you got some that are touching the base, and like they're all kind of touching the base, but they're in like overlapping layers. So that's pseudo-stratified. And then that can apply to your squamous or flat cells. You could have multiple layers of those, or they could be pseudo-stratified. And then the same thing goes for a cuboidal. They could be square, but they could be in all kinds of different combinations of layers. And then we have also the columnar, which is a long cylindrical cell, but it could be in multiple layers as well. So that was pretty simple and easy, right? So next we're going to go on to, excuse me, my cat is scratching. So muscle tissue, going on to that, there are 3 different kinds of muscle tissue. We have the skeletal muscle cells, we have cardiac muscle, and we have smooth muscle. So first we're going to talk about the muscle cells of our skeletal muscles, which applies the most to body workers and massage therapists. Skeletal muscle cells. So they are striated. You see these stripes. Jeez, cat, stop it. And then also you see that these little blue dots are going to be the nucleus inside of each of these cells. This is a cell. Each of these rows is a cell. Can you believe it? So they're a kind of different shape than what we learned in the last section on cells, where our cell was in like a bowl shaped. That isn't actually the case for all cells. That was just a demonstration of a round cell. But yeah, so each of these lines is demonstrating a border between Z segments. That is each segment where there is a strip of actin and a strip of myosin that are contracting. We're going to learn more about that when we get into the muscular system segment of this course, and also I talk about it in some kinesiology videos that I have on YouTube as well. So yeah, and then they are voluntary for the most part. Sometimes they're reflexive, but they're categorized as voluntary, meaning that usually your brain will tell the muscle to do it. Whereas for cardiac muscle cells, it's just always, ideally, cardiac muscle cells are constantly contracting because they're your heart muscle. Okay. And they are also striated, which means that they have chunks of contractile chunks in segments along the way, and that's those striations are what contracts. So yeah, your heartbeat is beating all the time, fortunately, and your brain doesn't have to tell it to do that. It just does it. So that is the brain or the spinal cord with like reflexes. So the last kind of muscle tissue, as I was saying, is the visceral, smooth muscle cells. They are not striated. They're kind of like teardrop shaped like this. It's like oblong shape, and each one is going to have a nucleus, right? They are also involuntary, and they exist in the blood vessels and in the walls of hollow organs. So, for example, in the walls of hollow organs, for like your digestive system, what do we call that when the muscles are the muscular tissue is contracting in the digestive system? We're going to talk about this a little bit more, but we call that peristalsis. That is when the smooth muscle cells are contracting to push food along through the digestive system. Okay, so now we're moving on to nervous system tissue, and this is just a short bit about that. It's the tissue in the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. This is a neuron right here. And these little bobbles on the neuron, those would be the glial cells. Okay, so the conductile tissue of the nervous system of nervous tissue is called a neuron, whereas the non-conductive tissue is called a glial cell, and that means glue. Glial means glue, and it insulates and it binds the neurons together. So these would be some insulation, and yeah, like the myelin sheath, that would be like a glial kind of situation. So 2 different kinds of cells in nervous system tissue. Okay, so now the most abundant tissue in the body for, the most abundant tissue in the body is the connective tissue. And so we're going to go over the 5 different types of connective tissue in just a minute, but first we just have to get some other information out of the way. So what connective tissue does is it connects, it binds, it supports, and it protects all the other structures in the body. So we're going to go over all of that in just a minute to talk about where all your connective tissue is. You're going to be really surprised. But here's some other kinds of connective tissue cells that are not part of the 5 that I just told you I'm going to tell you about. And that is a fibroblast cell exists in all the connective tissue, all the different kinds of connective tissue. They are the cells that produce the protein fibers that connective tissue is made out of. They're called in white blood cells. In in the bones, they're called osteoblasts. In the joints, they're called chondroblasts. So fibroblast in your muscle produces the proteins that makes the fibers. Now, another kind of tissue cell in connective tissue is a mast cell, and also we have macrophages, and they're both white blood cells, but mast cells are kind of like the alarm system in your connective tissue, and then the macrophages come along and chew up any invaders. Okay, so this is something that we need to cover before we go any further in talking about the details of different types of connective tissue, is that we need to talk about how connective tissue is built. And what you need to know is that the characteristics, that is like the texture and the consistency and the firmness of the connective tissue, is dependent upon what kind of fibers and the matrix that it's made out of. So like how much of a certain kind of protein and how much fluid it is compared to the protein. So collagen is one of the protein chains that goes into connective tissue, and it's firm. Reticular fibers are loose and elastic fibers are stretchy. So there can be all kinds of different combinations of the collagen, reticular, or elastic protein chains, and that's what's going to determine the density and the characteristics of that tissue. And then the ground substance is like everything other than the protein chains, which is mostly water plus this word right here. We call them GAGs. Okay, and they keep the connective tissue fluid and hydrated. Now, finally, we get to talk about all the different kinds of connective tissue and where they are. So we have liquid connective tissue, which is your blood and your lymph. Now remember that blood vessels and lymph vessels are both going to be smooth muscle fibers, but the blood, maybe lymph vessels aren't. I would love it if somebody wrote in the comments what kind of tissue lymph vessels are, because lymph vessels don't contract. So that's important. I don't think blood does either. So yeah, that'd be curious. I'm curious to know if lymph is a smooth muscle fiber. Blood vessels definitely are a smooth muscle fiber, but the liquid that goes through those is a connective tissue. And then the loose connective tissue is the adipose tissue, that's the fat, areolar, reticular. And then we have fibrous, which is tendons, ligaments, and fascia. We have cartilage, 3 different kinds of cartilage, and we have bone. compact and spongy bone. So here's some details. So blood cells as a connective tissue, carrier for oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and waste. Lymph, which is the fluid inside of our lymph vessels, transports immune cells, removes waste, and helps maintain fluid balance by returning excess interstitial fluid to the bloodstream. That's all the stuff that isn't the cells, right? Loose connective tissue, we've got the adipose tissue, which I was talking about. We have the areolar, which is the basement membrane. That's right. Basement membrane in subcutaneous skin. So the connective tissue that our epithelial tissue attaches to. That's why they call it the basement membrane. So reticular loose connective tissue is in the kidneys, in the spleen, in the lymph nodes, and in the bone marrow. So connective tissue types, let's see, fibrous. We're talking about the tendons, the ligaments, and the fascia. So that's all the stuff in the musculoskeletal system that is not contractile. Contractile muscle fiber is a muscle tissue, which is not the same thing as all of these things. So muscle is not a connective tissue. So tendon attaches the muscle to the bone, right there, see? And then ligaments attaches bone to bone. Fascia is the packaging around all the layers of the body. It's like a web that holds our body together. So then cartilage connective tissue. We have joint cushioning hyaline cartilage. We have fibrocartilage, which is spinal discs, knees, and between the pubic bones. And then we have elastic cartilage, which is in our nose and our ears. Okay, so bone tissue. Bone is a connective tissue. That's what it looks like. And yeah, here's another kind of bone tissue here. We have two different kinds of bone tissue. We have compact bone tissue, which is dense and solid, forming the outer layers of the bones. And then we have, and that's strength, protection, support, tightly packed for weight bearing. And then, so the spongy bone is porous and lightweight, found inside the bones, especially in the ends of the long bones. That's where the blood cells are produced, and it's designed to absorb shock and reduce bone weight without sacrificing strength. Okay, and so that is it. That's everything that you need to know for that section, the cellular part of the different tissues of the body. So let's do 4 MBLEx-style questions before we finish up. So first we have a question about epithelial tissue. It covers body surfaces and lines internal organs. Which of the following best describes one of its primary functions? So primary functions of epithelial tissue. What is epithelial tissue? Before we even look at the answers, epithelial is the skin tissue, and it lines the body cavities, and it also is like a coating outside of organs. So it conducts, does it A, conduct electrical impulses? No, that would be nervous tissue. Does it B, contract to produce movement and generate heat? No, that would be muscle tissue. Does it C, protect underlying structures and control absorption and secretion? That sounds a little bit more like it. Or D, stores minerals and provides structural support for the body. That would be bone connective tissue. So it has to be C. Protects underlying structures and controls absorption and secretion. Okay, so let's see. A massage therapist is explaining to a student how different muscle tissues function throughout the body. Which statement correctly matches the muscle type with its characteristics? So we're looking for a statement that's correct, matching the muscle type with its characteristic. Muscle type with characteristic. This part of the question is nonsense. It doesn't matter. Okay? It's just like, it's about tissues. We're looking for the correct statement. Muscle type with its characteristic. So remember, we have 3 different muscle types: smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and skeletal muscle. Okay. So remember what the voluntary or involuntary, before we look over these answers at all, what's voluntary and what's involuntary. We know smooth muscle is involuntary, right? We know cardiac muscle is involuntary, and we know skeletal muscle is voluntary, okay? So which is correct? Smooth muscle is involuntary and found in the walls of hollow organs. That is correct, okay? All right, we're done. Let's just make sure that there isn't anything else. Cardiac muscle is voluntary and attached to the bones of the skeleton. That's not true. Cardiac is heart muscle. C, skeletal muscle is involuntary. No, that's not right. We can stop there. Cardiac muscle is voluntary. That's not right. We can stop there. All right, so we know it's A. Boop. Smooth muscle tissue controls involuntary movements and structures such as the stomach, the intestines, and the blood vessels. Okay. Nervous tissue is responsible for communication and control throughout the body. Which statement correctly describes its structure and function? Structure and function, correct statement about nervous tissue. Okay, so let's look. Structure and function. We know that nervous tissue is glial cells, and those are not conductive, and neurons are conductive. So neurons transmit electrical impulses, and neuroglia support and protect those neurons. That looks right, okay? B, neurons store calcium? No, that's not right. Bones store calcium. Neuroglia produce energy? No, they don't. Our mitochondria produces energy. Neuroglia conduct nerve impulses? Nope, they're the protectors. So neurons line the body cavities? Nope, that would be the epithelial cells. So we've got A, neurons transmit electrical impulses, and glia support and protect those neurons. So neurons are the primary communication cells that carry electrical signals, while neuroglia, glial cells, nourish, protect, and maintain them. The other options confuse the functions from muscular, connective, or epithelial tissues, making them strong, but incorrect nonetheless. Which statement best explains why connective tissues vary in strength, flexibility, and function throughout the body? Now, you remember what we were just talking about when it comes to connective tissue and how there's so many different kinds of connective tissue. It's all about what it's made out of, okay? That would be the proteins and the different kinds of proteins and the fluid that the connective tissue is floating around it. So A, connective tissues differ based, statement best explains, okay? Connective tissue. Connective tissue differ based on the number of mitochondria and ribosomes in their cell. No, that's not what we were talking about. The characteristics of connective tissue are determined primarily by the composition of its extracellular matrix. That's exactly what it said in the slideshow. The flexibility of connective tissue depends entirely on the presence of voluntary muscle fibers. Nope. Connective tissue is not voluntary, doesn't have muscle fibers. Connective tissues contain epithelial cells that control the movement of nutrients and waste. No, that's not true. Epithelial cells are basically skin cells, and they do not control nutrients and waste. Epithelial cells protect, secrete, support. So connective tissues differ based on, that's right, the characteristics are determined by the composition of its extracellular matrix. That's the correct answer. Okay. The combination of fibers like collagen, elastin, ground substance surrounding its cell. All right, so that is it for this learning segment. We're done with talking about tissues on the cellular level. Next, we're going to be moving on to the integumentary system. I look forward to seeing you guys over there. So make sure and download that PDF of the slideshow for this so that you can use it as a reference later on. And I will see you over there. Next video. Toodaloo.